Well, hey there, idiots. Welcome back to Observe. In today's video, I'm going to be offering a nonverbal and behavioral analysis on the Wells parents. That would be the parents of Summer Wells, Dawn and Candace. Now, this is an ongoing investigation, and due to the size of this channel, I want to be able to offer this disclaimer since this is ongoing. Please do not use this in any way to be able to try to contact the police or do anything. This is just meant for education purposes only. This is not at all any form of legal evidence on this. I have not been asked to advise on this case on any level. Just wanted to make that very clear. Let's go ahead and run the intro, and then I'll give you a little bit of a backstory for those of you who don't know. Today's video is brought to us by Skillshare. Now, I love Skillshare and have even been considering creating a course on there myself. However, by this point, there are very few people who actually don't know what Skillshare is and what they do, which, by the way, it's an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people that can explore new skills, develop existing interests, and get lost in creativity. But what I found to be the case is that very few people seem to talk about how Skillshare has actually been applied. So not only is this video sponsored by Skillshare, but I would like to show you exactly how I applied it, and perhaps that can help you see how it can be useful for you as well. Yesterday, I uploaded the first ever short on the channel about the top do's and don'ts of nonverbal communication during an interview. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. The short only turned out as good as it did because I was able to use a course from Skillshare that wasn't even actually designed for YouTube Shorts, but rather for Instagram stories or Reels. The course was called Video for Instagram, Tell an Engaging Story in Less Than a Minute. This course, while designed for Instagram, works excellently for YouTube Shorts as well and helped me keep my goals in line while creating my video. This is only one of the thousands of courses curated specifically for learning, meaning that there are no ads and they're always launching new premium classes so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. Now, if this sounds interesting to you, and trust me, you can find at least one thing that should sound interesting, then consider following my link in the description below. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so you can start exploring your creativity today. Who knows, maybe if enough people sign up with that link, I might even be able to get around to making my own course a reality. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and back to the regular content. Summer Wells disappeared on the evening of June 15th. This sparked a months-long manhunt in the rugged mountainous terrain of Hawkins County. Nearly thousands of tips called into the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, or the TBI, have been dead ends, and some have all but given up hope of finding her alive. According to her father, Don Wells, at 5:30 p.m. on June 15, 2021, Summer was planting flowers about 20-ish feet from her family's house on Ben Hill Road in the community of Beach Creek with her mother and grandmother. She reportedly went inside and told her 3 older brothers that she wanted to play with her toys in the basement. But when her mother, Candace Wells, came inside a short time later, Summer was nowhere to be found. Shortly thereafter, she was reported to the police as missing, and that night at midnight, the TBI released an endangered child alert for her. However, after another 11 hours missing, they escalated it to an Amber Alert. Hundreds of people combed the surrounding dangerous and difficult terrain with no luck. Even teams of tracking dogs were unable to turn up anything useful. After nearly 1 month of intense searching, Shelley Smiderman, assistant special agent in charge of the TBI, stated that investigators typically have a credible tip or lead to go off of within a couple of days of a child disappearing. That's the frustrating part for law enforcement in this case, and for the public, she added. We will continue to investigate and search for Summer. In the public's eye, there may not be as much media attention given to the case, but that does not mean that we stop what we're doing. And that catches us up to current day. Like I said, this is still ongoing, so keep all of that in context with this. I will be looking at a specific interview that has been publicized very, very regularly and frequently on the internet to see if there is anything that pops out to me. We'll talk about some of the behavioral cues and nonverbal cues as they come up, and then, you know how these go. Let's go ahead and go.
A lot. I know she didn't walk away from this property by herself or off this yard.
So I want to be able to point out some things. First, as far as this is Candace, Just so you know, as far as Candace's normal and nonverbal baseline, from what I've seen across as much footage as I could track down, she does have this a little bit more nonchalant era about her. She seems a little bit subdued, and this could be for a number of reasons. It could be a medical reason, it could be a substance reason, or it could be a combination thereof. However, she does have a slower blink rate, and you could kind of hear here and there that her words are a little slurred. So that's something that I'm keeping in mind. And if there are substances or if there's a medical condition involved, then that will make it a little bit more difficult for me to establish a reliable baseline just because of that extra dynamic. I can no longer really rely on the normal universal tells, and it really boils down to her specific nonverbal communication. So let's see how that plays out.
By her swing, I feel in my heart that somebody has came up here and took her, has lured her away from here. Me and my mother and her were planting flowers.
So she's going to go into her recollection. As you can tell, she is probably on some form of medication or substance. And anytime that you can see a parent having lost a child, it's pretty common to see that happen. It's not unusual. It's just something that I'm taking note of. I will also say that the swing that she mentioned there briefly has been brought up repeatedly by many people. There's something about that swing. Perhaps that Summer always went to that swing and loved it. Any person who grows up in a difficult area or a difficult childhood will have an area of escape. Perhaps that swing was Summer's. So that's the mentioning of that swing. It does pop up multiple times. Along with that, I will say, and you might not see it here, but there are many times that the stories from various people, various family members, and friends are inconsistent, which makes it more difficult. Now, there are a few reasons for that. It could be because, well, somebody's lying and therefore, obviously, there's going to be inconsistencies, but also the human memory is very fickle. It's very easy to twist and distort a person's memory. It's very, very common and not unheard of in any way, especially if substances are involved. So those odd inconsistencies are still something that we have to keep track of, but it's not necessarily a big red flag, oh, they're guilty, that level of thing. Let's continue.
And we went in after we got done washing our hands, and she got a piece of candy from Grandma, and she wanted to go back over and see her brothers. And I said, okay, and I walked her all the way over to the porch, and I watched her walk into the kitchen where the boys were watching TV. And I told the boys, I said, watch Summer, I'll be back. And within 2 minutes I came back, and I asked the boys where their sister was, and they said, she went downstairs, Mom, to play with her toys in the playroom. I said, okay. And I yelled downstairs for her a couple times.
So still, we're really seeing that pattern from Candace of very slow, methodical words and movements in general, which, like I said, lending me to believe that there's something that's helping stimulate that specific character pattern there. But I will say that her verbal patterning, as far as the flow of her words go, have stayed where she's been consistently. There haven't been any odd spikes, except for when she's talking about where the boys were saying where Summer was, she sped up a fair bit as if recollecting at the speed that they said that. But outside of that one small anomaly, there haven't been any areas that have pushed me to want to probe further just based off of her voice side of things. I will say that her nonverbal communication seems odd, like I said, very subdued, but considering the context of that situation, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a huge red flag for me. Just simply something that I want to keep in mind as I move forward.
And I didn't get no answer, which was unusual because usually she always answers me. And so I went down there to check, and she was nowhere in sight. She was just gone. I don't go on walks around here.
In that area, that seemed pretty synchronized as far as her saying she's nowhere. She does make some pretty strong eye contact after that, but then also she was just gone and does a very synchronized movement all the way across her face and body with her words. That synchronization does kind of push me to believe that she's being authentic in that area. It's not enough to be able to say for sure yet. Let's continue watching.
Or runs because I'm scared of the bears and snakes and even the coyotes that are around here. Well, whoever has my daughter.
So that part where she just mentions, I don't go on walks or runs because of the bears, snakes, coyotes, so on and so forth. That's important because at the time, Dawn had said that she was out for a walk or a run. So that's one of those inconsistencies that crops up here. If you want to dig much more into this case, there's a lot, and obviously it's still a mystery because we don't know what happened here. I can talk about some of my opinions on stuff at the very, very end, but they will be not fully informed opinions, if that makes sense. I don't have access to all of the files. I don't have access to all of the areas searched because they're trying to keep that pretty well under wraps from the public for good reason, especially because if Summer was taken by somebody, they don't want that somebody to be able to watch the media and learn about where the case is to avoid it. I hope that makes sense. So I'll talk about my opinion later on, but just keep in mind that it will just simply be kind of an educated opinion. Let's continue.
I pray and hope that they have not harmed her and they bring her back to us safe and sound.
Just go to the FBI, the police, and clear it up. I mean, I don't know, it seems...
So you could see Don's shoulder doing some pretty prevalent activity here. That seems to be due to his hand movement. He's probably readjusting and tucking his hand in. As a person sits, it's a form of bracing. When you tuck your hand in a very secure position, it makes you feel secure. And along with that, it's shifting around to a postural shift, which anytime that somebody has something to say or it's their turn in something, you will see a postural shift crop up. All that I'm saying is that in context with what's going on here, the little micro shrugs or movements here of his shoulder that you see coming in lopsided, while it could be misinterpreted as being insincere, in context, it makes a lot more sense with the rest of his body movements and what has just happened in the interview. So I don't believe that that's at all incriminating for him.
Kind of elusive.
It's really strange that I've never seen this truck, and I've never heard of it until just recently.
The truck that they're referring to is a red Toyota, if I remember correctly, that was seen and that might have information. They're trying to track that truck down. And so that's where she's saying, I've never seen or heard of this truck and I find that strange. That's just adding some context in here. There are some loose ends that they're still pursuing. The law enforcement has shut down many of these dead-end loose ends that were out by the public because they received, almost 1,000 different tips or in July or something like that. So it could be well over that by now. So they had so many tips to be able to shut down. This red truck is one of those that has cropped up that they're still pursuing and haven't been able to close off yet. Ergo, her addressing it here.
But I wish they would come forward and explain themselves. And if you're not a suspect, at least come forward and say what you've seen. She was a tomboy.
Which is true. Like she said there, the truck hasn't come forward. The owner of the truck, despite it being massively publicized in both the local newspapers and then also across national television, and any news site and source and media outlet, blah, 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 has covered this. So her point of being like, why haven't you come forward, is valid. Whether or not it's because it has something to do with Summer, I don't know. Regardless, that person obviously doesn't want to come forward. Whether or not it's applicable is, we don't know.
Boy, I shaved my head. She wanted to have her head shaved like me and the boys did.
She tried to shave her head
She tried
in
to
the
shave her
back
head
and make it, I think you can see it in some of the pictures, and it was getting out of control. So we decided to shave her head off and let it grow back long, and she shaved her head so she wouldn't feel bad, and but it didn't bother her at this point. Well, I knew right away that she was abducted. I knew that right away, and that's what I told him from.
This is odd because now you could see a large burst of movement from Don's otherwise pretty subdued baseline. He stayed pretty stable throughout the rest of the interview. There hasn't been too much, to be fair, as well, but that also falls in line with some other areas that I've been able to see some footage. It's been pretty subdued. And then he does a whole lot of fidgeting and shifting around. I knew pretty much from the start that she had been abducted. And the reason that that's also suspicious to the police is because they didn't find any reason to believe that. There wasn't any evidence that would push them in that direction besides that Summer's not there and we don't know why. And I'll talk a little bit about some of my theories. And like I said, they're basically only theories about at your level at this point, but some of my theories about what could have happened at the very end. But I do find it odd that spike pops up there. So it's something I want to keep in the back of my mind as I keep moving forward in this.
In the beginning, but they have to go through their, I forget the word.
Investigation.
We have to do one step at a time, I guess, but I'm sorry that they had to spend so many man hours in these woods and everything. I've seen them limping and everything else, you know, and I feel for them. But I just wish there was a way that neighbors could search neighbors' houses, and then if they're not willing, you know, get a search warrant or something. But there's just no way you can search every single house, you know, in the eastern United States or whatever.
So I find that fascinating that he is saying he's certain that she's not somewhere out there in the bushes, which there can't be a way that he's certain unless he knows. So this is probably just more of a form of speech that he's saying there, that he's certain that she's not out there. He's got a gut feeling, what have you, whatnot. But he then also brings up this tidbit about, I wish there was a way that I could search neighbors' houses, which means that he's suspicious of the neighbors around or people that they know. I think that's important. I think that's a very important detail in this case in general. So we'll readdress that in just a tiny bit. I'll give you some more information and we'll just kind of take it as it goes.
But I wish there was a way. Just thankful for the person or persons that's doing that, you know, out of love, and trying to get information and trying to get her found. We thank them from the bottom of our hearts.
That means a lot.
And we thank everybody who's trying so hard and praying so hard. And she's an awesome young lady, and we just want her back.
Very strange emotional display from these two. It does seem what people would qualify as odd, but just so you know, walking into something like this, unless you consider the context of it to pre-assume what a person's emotional state will be, is adding bias from your own point of view. It's extremely hard to avoid, and it's something that I'm trying to actively counteract by acknowledging certain facets. Like, it is quite clear that both of them have an altered state of mind right now just by how they're behaving, and whether or not that's due to alcohol, medication, substances, or something else, we don't know, but it is altered. So that does add a different point of view to the read, and that does make it more complicated, because if anything, substances, regardless of where they're coming from, will make a nonverbal read more difficult because it changes how a person processes down to a very psychological level. Therefore, obviously, the nonverbal, which is the physical upwelling of psychology, will be different as well. So that's just something that we have to keep in mind and keep in context. Let's keep watching.
Yeah, there's always going to be haters, you know, and you know, it's always going to be that way in this world, and we just want to focus on the good friends and Christian people that are trying to help us and praying for us and praying for Summer. And we thank them from the bottom of our hearts, and that's the kind of people we try to relate with and socialize with. So we don't know anything about, you know, no red.
He does make a very specific and conscious calling to his religion, the Christianity that he's a part of. And he says specifically the Christian people, and kind of excludes anybody else in that. And it is interesting. So Don has a very rough criminal past. There's a very long laundry list on his record, if that makes sense. You can go and look it up if you would like to and dig a little bit deeper on that. So it is fascinating to me that he is calling on religion now in these areas. People who are guilty will sometimes call on religion to be able to present themselves as more pure when it's really just a manipulation technique. I don't know that that's the case in this area. I have seen footage of the Wells family in church, and Don, for the most part, seems to be quite engaged with the message that's being delivered. Is it an act? Perhaps. But I also know that at that moment, he wasn't thinking, I have to be, you know, on par here, I have to be hamming it up or anything like that, because it was before Summer went missing. So for him to be able to show that level of engagement in church during this time kind of does lend me to believe that he might at least be engaged in that a little bit. So some people have been pointing fingers at him, being like, oh, he's really a terrible human, and it's only during times of trials that he falls back on his religion. Also, that's not uncommon. Many people will be religious when things are hard, and as soon as they get easy, they'll frolic away from that. So that wouldn't be unheard of, and some people say they know him. There's a lot of hearsay on this front, but just based off of the visual evidence that I've found, I would be at least inclined to partially believe him when he's talking about the religious side of things, and that it's not at least totally a ploy for I'm pure when I'm really not. I hope that makes sense to you. I hope that adds a little bit of context. Let's continue.
Or we hardly know many of our neighbors, I mean, because we just try to be around good people. I mean, and we do have good people in this area. We found.
So you can see here by where his arms have gone to now, he was sitting in a different way, and it looks as if he's crossed his arms in front of him. Now he's hunched as well. So those two things combined are interesting to me. It's not a huge red flag that means that he's lying here, but it is interesting that he's closing up when once again speaking about his neighbors. He's saying that he doesn't know anything about his neighbors, and then also in this area, he is closing up a little bit and hunching up. Those are defensive gestures considered in context, not necessarily all the time. Just because you see somebody folding or crossing their arms, that does not mean they're blocking or hiding anything. Considering it in context, this is a spike from his baseline. Could he be getting more comfortable? Quite possibly. Is it odd that there are now two areas where he's had some conflict, some psychological conflict centered around neighbors? Yes, that is odd. So it's just a pattern. We're keeping it in mind as we continue forward.
Found out since this has all happened, we got some real good neighbors and good folks everywhere. But
the most important thing is to bring Summer home safe.
She steps in there as well. He was about to say and he's shaking his head. That means it was going to be a negative or a disbelief side of things. So she steps in before he could finish that sentence. I find that very interesting. Once again, this is in relation to the neighbors. Also, they don't check in with each other as they're talking. If you watch a couple interact, unless they've rehearsed something beforehand, oftentimes they'll do a check-in to see where the other person's going with stuff so that they can make sure that they're all on the same page. It's just an average part of everyday social interactions. They don't do that here, and that doesn't mean that they've rehearsed this story, but it is still something that I just want to keep track of as I move forward. I just want to gather as much data as I can before giving an opinion. Let's continue on that front.
I'm sorry that you feel this way about us, but we love our children with everything we have. We've never went without.
Consistent no shake during that. I'm sorry that you feel this way about us, and there's a few ways that we can interpret that. That no shake in America means no, it's a negative emotion. So with that in context with that, we know for sure it's a negative emotion. Whether or not it's she's disagreeing as she's saying, I'm so sorry, then that could be a desynchronization point. She's not really sorry. Or it could just be that she's shaking her head in relation to the negative emotions that they have been receiving from other people. Just so you know, their living quarters are not very sanitary. It's quite dirty. It's very difficult to look at. But they also have a low income level, and that's not uncommon to see. And if substances are involved as well, it all does kind of fall into place. A lot of people have been attacking them for their living conditions, and that's what she's addressing here. I'm saying simply that her nonverbal communication isn't showing any sort of useful deception leakage in this point, or truth leakage would be more of the way to look at this. There's just nothing that's showing as an anomaly to me. So far, it's still making sense in context, even though the sense that it's making is still very confusing. Let's continue.
Well, thanks to Summer's daddy and my husband. He's always provided for us and has worked as much as...
That's an interesting deal there. There seems to be maybe an emotional disconnect between the two on this front. So also to add some more dynamic in to maybe explain some of this emotional disconnect, there's a few reasons. When she says to Summer's daddy, my husband, that first statement is a distancing statement to Summer's daddy. She's definitely referring to her husband, but she refers to him as Summer's daddy first, which is a third person kind of disconnect. It's not directly related to her. It's Summer's daddy, who she's also the mom, if you see what I'm saying. Then she says my husband, and there was also a pretty substantial hesitation to Summer's daddy, my husband. That means that there's something going on in her brain centered around that aspect of things. And I will let you know, it seems as though Dawn was more interested in the religion, Christianity, and going to church than Candace was. In fact, in this very footage that I was referring to earlier, where it showed Dawn being engaged with the message being delivered at the time, Candace was openly and unashamedly pulling her hood down and going to sleep in the front row. So that disconnect between those two can be very contentious. Having that sort of disagreement within a couple can actually lead even to a couple splitting, and oftentimes it will. So that could be part of what's going on there. Also, there could be some sort of emotional contention between the two, even just caused by a missing child. Perhaps they're suspecting each other, perhaps they've been in fights. I'm sure they have, as many couples would be in that area. And that could be another reason for that distancing and odd vocal patterns that popped out there. Just adding some more character context to these people as we watch them.
He could, and can, and still is. And I'm sorry that you guys feel that way, but that's my baby, and nobody would ever treat her like that as long as I was around, ever.
She loves to dance. She would always want me. She says, "Daddy, hold my hand so I can twirl," and she would just like to twirl and twirl and twirl until my arm got tired, you know. But I put out there that one of Summer's favorite songs.
So I'll say this, he's referring to her in present tense right now. That's important because in a person's mind, they'll speak as their mind is perceiving things. So if a person's seeing or perceiving or thinking about or considering something in present tense, it will be reflected naturally in their verbal communication. Present, 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 and that's been the case here. If you hear it come out to where they were referring to it as present and then switch to a past tense or bounce back and forth, then that means that at least in their brain, their psychology, they're seeing this person as either gone or present or mostly gone or something along those lines. There's confusion there. So I just will note that he has been using present tense there in this part. That is important to note. Let's continue.
Songs was Godzilla, and they say, and they're jumping all over me about past tense was, well, I'm sorry about that. It's just...
She also liked the song by New Breed.
So I just brought that up, like I just said, and he's saying, I'm sorry about that. He just kind of leaves it be after that front. He doesn't say, like, hey, this is why, this is where. But the thing is like I just said, that doesn't mean that he knows she's dead. That could just mean that he is perceiving and thinking and considering of her as gone. Because it's been a number of days, and, even to just put it uncomfortably coldly, the likelihood is that she is no longer with us, and that's very tragic, but that is statistically what has happened. So that could be what he's doing. That could even be his personal way of coping with it. I'm not sure. I will just say that jumping around in tenses that he just mentioned that he's been called out for there is a reflection of that state of mind from him. Does it mean he's guilty? No. Does it mean that he might think that she's gone? Yeah. Absolutely. So let's keep watching.
It was called House, My House. She sung that a lot of times when I play it on the TV. She loved to dance.
She liked to think of herself as a princess and, and all that, like all young girls do. And
she loved Frozen. She loved to be that Elsa and...
And I think she really loved to be in church because she felt a lot of love there, and I think you can't explain what that love is, but you feel it and you know it, when you're young, and she felt that there, and she loved everybody in that church, or she loves everybody in that church. I should rephrase that because they'll tear that apart as past tense, and I apologize again for that. I hope she gets to come home, and I hope she gets to be with our church family again.
Our best friend in that church was Robin. She loved her to death.
Yeah, she looked up to women that were...
She come to that church, she went looking for Robin. That was her favorite person.
Any woman that was professional, that
was pretty, beautiful.
She looked up to those kind of women. She, they were, the word I'm looking for, I can't think of it, but... She looked up to them. She'd give them a run for their money every day. She'd give them a run for their money, and there was time.
So that's another aspect, once again, that they brought in here, and I will talk about that neighbor relation thing a little bit later. But I will say that there's very little mirroring between the two of them. It's not like they're leaning in towards each other in any special way, showing an emotional connection. She's not replicating any of the emotions that he's showing. Neither of them are emoting very prevalently as is. Even where I've paused it here on Candace's face, this could be seen as a contempt expression, but it also falls in line with the little statement that Dawn had given earlier. But this kind of gives you that idea of how far they emote. It's not a very overt emotional state that they have physically. So it's making things difficult is more or less what I'm saying here, but more on the neighbor thing in a bit.
Times, we'd be, at our boys like, don't do this and don't do that. And next thing you know, a stick would come up and just whop them, and it'd be like, Summer, don't do that.
Summer was the boss of the family.
Yeah,
She
typical girl.
When they get out of line, she'd put them in line.
She'd do her best.
She loved to play in the mud.
Okay, so I'm seeing the smile reach Candace's eyes, which is a good indicator that it's an authentic smile. I do not get from either of these that either of these two are great actors. I don't think that they're any form of talent as far as acting goes in these two. So when I see a smile genuinely reach Candace's eyes, I'm more likely to believe that it's a genuine felt emotion, which is good. You would want to be able to see that sort of fondness from a parent to a child. Now, that doesn't necessarily add anything to this right now. It's more so just kind of compiling a little bit more understanding about how Candace is emoting on this front, but it is something that I've made note of, so let's keep going.
In the water and swing on her swing and enjoy dirt.
When I run the lawnmower around, she would run behind me. When the boys run their bikes around, she, as fast as that little bike could go, she would be behind them running and keeping up with them, no problem. She loved to run. She just loved to run, and she could pull herself up on that swing, her full body weight with her two hands, and she could do that. None of the other boys can do that, but she can.
Was she in school yet?
No, she's going this year.
This was supposed to be her first year.
She's been. We did all the what?
I took care of everything.
Yeah.
I had her already took on all of her shots and registered in the school ready for this year.
I just never expected for anyone to get a hold of my heart like she has, because I try to guard my heart as much as I can, but she holds my heart in her little hands, and I love her with all my heart. I'd do anything to have her back.
So I'm paying attention to where his eyes are going during this time to see how it's communicating non-verbally, and I'm seeing him look around in various areas, and yes, I could look at that and be like, okay, so he's looking in various areas when he's talking about various things and seeing if I could draw anything out with that. But alongside that, considering the context, you can hear stuff happening perhaps behind the lens, so to speak, as people are walking around, and he's more likely to get distracted by that in those periods. So really, it's just made it to where there's so much nonverbal noise, so to speak, that it's less usable. It's less credible. So I'm not going to hold too much weight to where he's looking and how he's looking and eye movements and so on and so forth during this time. I hope that makes sense contextually.
You're a little girl.
If there's any way, if you can find it in your heart to please release her somehow, I don't know how you might do that. I mean, 'cause you're probably scared of going to prison for the rest of your life and everything else, I'm sure. But please find it in your heart, have mercy, and find a way of letting her go and where we can get her back. And just please have mercy on her and, and us and her brothers. And she's such a loving, good spirit. Please don't hurt her. Please let her come home. My biggest fear is, her being tormented or locked in a dungeon or basement or something, because she loved to be outside all the time. And that was her, unfortunately, her downfall. 'Cause a lot of times the boys would be inside and we'd be like, "Where's Summer? Why'd you leave her out there alone? Go get Summer now." And that's happened over and over again. And we'd come out and she would always be close by, but we was always coming up. She had to be outside. She was an outdoor person. And
she loved to be outside.
Yep. And I'm so afraid that she's locked away. She's such a loving heart and everything. And
he keeps saying that he's so afraid that she's locked away, but we can tell just by how he's speaking of things that that's not what he feels. I think he feels that she is dead, and whether or not that's because he knows that she is, or just because that's how he feels, that is what is reflected with his tints. And he has brought it up a couple times, like, hey, I'm sorry that I keep using this. He never offers a reason that he's using that. So we can't cross off that he might be guilty. It's still there. It still has to be acknowledged, but we can't cross it off as an option yet. And that tints thing is coming up. What we can absolutely do is know that he is considering and thinking and feeling about her that she's gone. She's no longer with them. She's gone. So that's just what we can say. So where he's saying that he's worried about her being locked somewhere, that might be true, but he feels like she's gone. I hope that makes sense. And that's actually reflected in both of their verbal patterns. Both of them have been regularly referring to Summer in the past tense. And that also does make sense, though, because she has been absent from their lives at this point for some time. So that would still make sense, even just considering that context as well. Does it mean they're guilty? Absolutely not. Don't go and berate them with more stuff about, hey, you used the wrong tense, so obviously you're lying, because frankly, that doesn't have any determining factor right now. It just means that they perceive her and feel her as gone. So let's continue.
I'm afraid that she won't be able to, I'm blocked away where she can't be outside or play with a puppy or anything, love nature, and it's that's my greatest fear, that she's not able to do any of these things anymore, or that she could possibly, I don't want to think she's dead, but it's a possibility. I don't want to address all the negativity. I just want to focus on the positive, because it's so easy to get, lost in that.
So there, Candace does check-in. That check-in that you just saw, very prevalent and obvious one, that would be more what you'd expect to see throughout the entirety of it. We didn't see any of that. And it's strange how he spent so much time focusing on her being held in captivity. And all that it is strange. It's just something that I would like to take note of. Push more on, see, maybe investigate, perhaps on both sides of that coin. If he's feeling like or saying that she's in captivity, perhaps it's his subconscious being like, I know where she is, she's in captivity, I know that, and then that's why it's leaking out so consistently in his verbal patterning. Or if he's more on top of it, these are both if he's guilty cases kind of thing. Or if he's more on top of it and guilty still, he could be trying to throw out a red herring so that people are more focused to find her inside, whereas he knows she's like outside or something like that. It's just interesting that it pops up, but I'll share my opinion in a little bit. Let's finish up the rest of this.
That negativity and stuff, and it's just not worth it. So I'm just, I appreciate y'all, the good things you say, and your prayers. That's awesome.
When my sister came missing, I was in between Arkansas and Tennessee. I don't know all of what happened or what did happen, but I hope that they find her too and bring her home safely too.
Well, yeah, there's nothing. She disappeared without a trace. They haven't found anything, haven't found a body, nothing, and
Ooh, his vocal pattern has sped up dramatically. He has been quite subdued and methodical with his words before, and then once it comes to the sister aspect, he speeds up rather rapidly. I'm not sure why that is. It is interesting that he is rushing through that specific area so quickly, but I mean, there's just not enough to go off of. Just to add context for those of you who don't know the situation, Candace's younger sister has also been missing without any evidence as to where she's gone. That's still an unclosed case as well. So there's two instances of people missing, all centered around Candace. It's very intriguing, all in all. Let's continue.
When you see cases like that, that's why I lose hope on Summer. I want to keep hope, but sometimes I lose hope.
Lose it.
And I think, well, maybe we won't never see her again, so I start thinking in past tense, sorry. But I'm trying to keep hope up. I'm trying to keep my prayers up and all that.
Okay, so that's what I was able to track down of that interview there. Like I said, everybody has seen it, everybody's talking about it, so I figured I'd go ahead and address it. And once again, as he even brought up there, that act of losing hope and bringing light to losing hope almost adds credibility to Don's side in that it admits a crack. It admits a flaw in his character and his feelings about the situation. If he were guilty, the biggest goal for a person who's guilty is to be perceived as completely not guilty. They don't want any eyes on them for any reason because it would seem suspicious. And if they're guilty, suspicion is the last thing you want. Think about any of the other people who have done terrible things and have sat down in interviews or interrogations, and pay attention to whether or not they accept any form of crack in their storyline, their emotional perception, anything about them. They regularly will try to become the most overtly pure and innocent person that could ever be perceived. So for Don to be able to say, honestly, there have been times that I lose hope, and I use the past tense because I'm having trouble keeping hope, that's more honest, and it would actually lend towards his credibility in a reverse style of fashion. So here's everything kind of that you can see in this. There's obviously some things that I'll definitely miss because no person is accurate fully in nonverbal communication yet. Even Paul Ekman, the pioneer of microexpressions and nonverbal communication of the face, he himself states that he is maybe 80 to 85% accurate on average. So just keep that in mind. There are definitely opportunities for people who are in this field of behavioral and nonverbal analysis to be able to look at a situation and misread it. Perhaps a bias seeps in a little bit too much, or they miss a certain detail or a context that would have helped clarify something. So just keep that in mind, especially if you're passionate about this case. Try to gather information from everywhere. Don't take any single person's word on it by all means. So talking about just my opinions on the situation, right now, there's not enough for me to be able to point a finger at them and say, you did it. There's just not enough information. I don't have access to it. And even if there were a way for me to get access to it, until we know where she is, there's still not going to be fully enough information. So I don't know. I don't know that they're guilty. I will say that they have some odd patterns, some odd vocal patterns, odd nonverbal patterns, and there have been quite a few reasons that would back up both of those either being guilty or not guilty. I think that they are probably not guilty. I don't think that they killed their daughter or anything along those lines intentionally. There's a few things that I would consider maybe could have happened, is that perhaps Summer was out and about and she had an accident and something fatal happened to Summer, and the parents feel guilty because of something like neglect. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're guilty just because they act differently than how you or I would feel like we would act. Substances being involved or medical things being involved definitely adds a different dynamic to this that makes it more muddy, more difficult, and harder just in general to get an accurate read just because of the effects of that. So perhaps Summer had an accident. The parents feel guilty because they had an accident and maybe were being neglectful or feel like they were being neglectful, so they had to cover it up. Questionable? I don't know. There's not really too much evidence for that. Another one that I just find interesting, and this is centered around some of the patternings that they've had and the odd behaviors that they have, are around the neighbors. Now, why were they having so much odd activity around the neighbors? Yes, you would suspect the people closest around, so that would be one very easy out for that. But along with that, with the footage that I've seen of Summer, she spent more time going around to other people and being with other people than her own family while at places like church. Not the least of which was, I believe her name was Amber, I think was the person that they mentioned. I'm blanking on it right now, but hopefully it was Amber. There was a specific woman at church that Summer had a pretty strong affinity towards and would spend much of her time towards or around this woman. And I find that curious, and that brings in a different aspect of this case that might even be more, it's sad, but more hopeful. I don't know if it's sad or hopeful or what have you, but just a different aspect that perhaps this wasn't driven by hatred for Summer. It could have been driven by compassion because, like I said, Summer's not in a super healthy living condition. To also add some perspective, if I've heard correctly, the boys have also been removed from the Wellses' care. So to have that be the case as well, it could have been compassion that encouraged somebody who cared for Summer to try to get Summer away. And that would explain why maybe they're just very wary of their neighbors. Maybe the neighbors caught wind of or heard about the living conditions that Summer was in and wanted to get her out of it. Could be a more hopeful way to look at it. It's very difficult to say. It's extremely difficult to say just from basic lack of available evidence. I know that the local law enforcement especially, has much more evidence than we're able to have access to, and that's okay because we want to protect Summer at all costs of this. So the purpose of making this video, hopefully you learn some things about this, help put some things into perspective and whatnot. But long story short, keep your eye out for valid tells for the police. Do not go and spread hate to anybody right now. It's not helpful. Our goal is to be able to track down where Summer is. So that's just kind of my opinion on this. As I said at the beginning of this is in no way any professional or legal advice. This is simply designed for education purposes on the internet with a very limited scope of knowledge based off of what the public is able to access. So keep that in mind and, proceed appropriately from there. Another big thanks again to our sponsor, who is Skillshare. I appreciate you sponsoring this episode. If any of you are watching, please go and follow the link in the description below. It might make it to where I can design a course specifically centered around nonverbal communication for you to be able to go through. There will be assignments, so on and so forth, and that would kind of help me understand whether or not that's something that I can do. So thanks again to Skillshare. But without further ado, that's all that I've got for today. My name is Logan, and you have been oh so awesome as you always are, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.